The security keycard beeped its familiar welcome as Sarah Chen stepped into the glass-walled offices of Meridian Tech Solutions for what she didn't know would be the last time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors, and the familiar hum of servers in the distance provided a comforting backdrop to her routine. She'd been walking these halls for 7 years, building systems, protecting data, and earning the trust of every department head in the company. Her coffee was still steaming when she noticed the unusual silence. No friendly waves from the accounting team, no casual "morning Sarah" from the developers. Even Janet from HR, who never missed a chance to chat about her weekend plans, kept her eyes glued to her monitor. Something was wrong. Sarah's workstation looked exactly as she'd left it the night before. 3 monitors arranged in perfect symmetry, her lucky coffee mug with the faded "World's Best Systems Administrator" text, and the small, succulent plant her niece had given her for her birthday. But there was an envelope propped against her keyboard, her name written in careful block letters across the front. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. The letterhead made her stomach drop. Notice of employment termination. Effective immediately, the letter began. Due to company restructuring and cost-cutting measures, your position as Senior Systems Administrator has been eliminated. Your final paycheck, including accrued vacation time, will be processed within 2 weeks. Sarah read the words 3 times before they truly sank in. 7 years. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of being the only person who understood the intricate web of systems that kept Meridian running. 7 years of being called at 3 a.m. when something broke, of missing family dinners to prevent data breaches, of treating this company's digital infrastructure like her own child. Sarah? The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, the Chief Technology Officer. She'd known Marcus since his first day 5 years ago, had trained him on half the systems he now oversaw. His usually confident demeanor seemed shaken as he approached her desk. Marcus. She held up the letter. I assume you know about this? He shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. The board made the decision yesterday. Budget cuts across all departments. I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. Budget cuts. The words tasted bitter. You're telling me the company that just signed a $50 million contract with the Defense Department can't afford my salary? It's not about what we can afford, Marcus said quietly. It's about maximizing efficiency. The board feels that some of our senior positions might be redundant given our new streamlined approach. Sarah's laugh was hollow. Redundant, right. She gestured to her monitors, still displaying the system diagnostics she'd been running the night before. Tell me, Marcus, who's going to maintain the backup protocols? Who's going to manage the server migrations? Who's going to— We've hired someone, he interrupted. Fresh out of college, very eager, very capable, and she's costing us a fraction of what— He trailed off, realizing how that sounded. A fraction of what I cost. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. You're replacing me with an intern to save, what, $8,000 a year? Marcus's silence was answer enough. I need you to gather your personal items, he said finally. Security will escort you out. It's company policy. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of humiliation. Sarah packed her few personal belongings into a cardboard box while 2 security guards stood nearby as if she were some kind of criminal. Her colleagues pretended to be busy, but she could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't them. As she was led through the lobby, she caught sight of a young woman at the reception desk, filling out paperwork. Barely 22, with an eager smile and a brand new laptop bag. The replacement. Ms. Chen? The security guard's voice was gentle but firm. We need to collect your access cards and any company property. Sarah handed over her keycard, her building pass, and the company phone she'd carried for years. Each item felt like a small piece of her identity being stripped away. Standing on the sidewalk outside Meridian Tech Solutions, cardboard box in her arms, Sarah felt the weight of betrayal settle in her chest. 7 years of loyalty, of going above and beyond, of being the one person who could fix anything that went wrong. and they'd replaced her with a college graduate who probably didn't even know the difference between a server and a workstation. She pulled out her personal phone and dialed her best friend Lisa. "Hey, what's up? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" "I just got fired," Sarah said, her voice finally cracking. 7 years, Lisa. 7 years, and they threw me away like I was nothing. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over?" "No, I need to process this. I'll call you later." Sarah ended the call and stood there for a moment, watching the building where she'd spent most of her adult life. The windows gleamed in the morning sun, reflecting nothing back at her. She'd given everything to this company, and they'd discarded her for an $8,000 savings. What they didn't know, what Marcus and the board and their eager new intern couldn't possibly understand, was that some knowledge couldn't be easily transferred. Some systems were more complex than they appeared on the surface, and some disasters could only be prevented by someone who truly understood the delicate balance of technology, security, and human nature. As Sarah walked to her car, she had no idea that her replacement was already making her first critical mistake. The eager young intern, tasked with cleaning up the server files to make room for new projects, had just opened a directory labeled Legacy Backups and was about to delete what she assumed were old, unnecessary files. The files that contained the only remaining copies of Meridian's most valuable intellectual property. What do you think will happen next? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. 23-year-old Jessica Park bounced into the Meridian Tech Solutions office building with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just landed their first real job. Her computer science degree was still fresh, and the opportunity to work at a company that handled government contracts felt like winning the lottery. When Marcus Webb had called her with the offer, she'd practically squealed with excitement. "You'll be taking over for our former systems administrator," Marcus had explained during her brief phone interview. "She was let go yesterday. We need someone who can jump right in." Jessica hadn't asked many questions. She was too thrilled to be chosen, too eager to prove herself. Besides, how hard could it be? She'd graduated summa cum laude, had interned at 2 tech companies during college, and could code in 7 different programming languages. She was ready for anything. Her first day began with a whirlwind tour of the office. Marcus introduced her to the development team, the network engineers, and the handful of other IT staff who'd survived the recent restructuring. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though she noticed a few odd looks when Marcus mentioned she was Sarah Chen's replacement. "Sarah was here for 7 years, explained Tom Martinez, one of the junior developers. "She knew these systems inside and out, built half of them herself." "Well, I'm a quick learner," Jessica replied with a bright smile. "I'm sure I'll figure everything out in no time." Tom exchanged a glance with another developer but didn't say anything more. Marcus led Jessica to her new workstation, the same desk where Sarah had worked for 7 years. The monitors were still arranged exactly as Sarah had left them, and there was a small ring stain on the desk where her coffee mug had sat. "The previous administrator left some notes," Marcus said, handing Jessica a thin folder. "But honestly, we're looking for fresh eyes on everything. Some of these systems have been running on legacy code for too long. We need someone who can modernize, streamline, clean things up." Jessica nodded eagerly. She loved the idea of being a reformer, someone who could bring new efficiency to old systems. "What's my first priority?" "Storage space," Marcus said immediately. "We're running low on server capacity and the board is breathing down my neck about it. I need you to go through all the old files, clean out anything that's not essential and free up some space. The Defense Department contract is generating massive amounts of data, and we need room to store it." "Consider it done," Jessica said, already rolling up her sleeves. Marcus smiled. "I can tell you're going to work out great." Sarah was, well, she was very set in her ways, always insisting we needed to keep everything, always worried about deleting old files. But sometimes you have to clear out the clutter to make room for progress, you know? After Marcus left, Jessica spent her first hour exploring the network architecture. It was more complex than she'd expected, with layers upon layers of interconnected systems. Sarah's documentation was extensive but dense, filled with technical jargon and references to protocols Jessica had never heard of. She found herself growing frustrated with the complexity of it all. Why did everything have to be so complicated? Why couldn't it be more straightforward, more intuitive? By lunch, Jessica had decided that Sarah's approach had been overly cautious, probably paranoid. The file system was cluttered with what appeared to be redundant backups, old project files, and archived data that probably hadn't been accessed in years. It was exactly the kind of inefficiency that modern IT practices were designed to eliminate. She started with what seemed like the most obvious targets for deletion, a series of directories labeled with dates from several years ago. Backup 2019, Legacy Archive 2020, Deprecated Systems 2021. Clearly old files that were taking up valuable space. "Excuse me," she called out to Tom Martinez. "Do you know anything about these old backup directories? They're huge, and they seem to be just sitting there taking up space." Tom looked up from his monitor, concern flickering across his face. "Which ones?" "All of these legacy folders," Jessica said, pointing to her screen. "Some of them are taking up terabytes of space. I can't see any reason to keep them." I'm not sure," Tom said slowly. "Sarah was always really careful about backups. Maybe you should check with Marcus before—" "Marcus specifically told me to clean things up," Jessica interrupted with a confident smile. "Besides, if they were important, they'd be clearly labeled, right? These just look like old junk to me." Tom opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He'd learned not to argue with management decisions. If the new systems administrator wanted to delete old files, that was her call. Jessica spent the afternoon methodically working through the directory structure, deleting what she perceived as redundant or outdated files. She was proud of her efficiency, clearing gigabytes of data with each deletion. By the end of the day, she'd freed up nearly 3 terabytes of space. "How did your first day go?" Marcus asked as he stopped by her desk at 6 p.m. "Fantastic," Jessica beamed. "I've already cleared up a ton of storage space. Your predecessor was definitely a pack rat. She kept everything. I found backup files that were 3-4 years old just sitting there. I've streamlined the whole system." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need." Sarah always resisted any changes to her filing system. She'd claim everything was critical or essential. But you can't innovate if you're always looking backward, right? "Absolutely," Jessica agreed. "I'm planning to spend tomorrow going through the rest of the archives. I bet I can free up another few terabytes by the end of the week." What Jessica didn't know was that among the files she'd deleted were the only remaining copies of Meridian's proprietary encryption algorithms, the ones that had taken Sarah's team 3 years to develop and which formed the backbone of their Defense Department contract. The files had been stored in the Legacy Backup Directory because the active server had been corrupted 6 months ago, and Sarah had been in the process of rebuilding the system when she was fired. She also didn't know that the Deprecated Systems 2021 folder contained the source code for Meridian's most valuable software patents, or that the Backup 2019 directory held the only copies of client data that were essential for 3 ongoing legal cases. As Jessica gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She'd made a real difference on her first day, brought efficiency and modern thinking to an outdated system. Tomorrow, she'd continue the cleanup process, maybe even implement some of the automation protocols she'd learned about in school. Behind her, the computer screen displayed a neat, organized directory structure, clean, efficient, and missing roughly $18 million worth of irreplaceable data. But Jessica wouldn't discover that for another 3 days. Sarah Chen stood in her apartment kitchen, staring at the unemployment forms spread across her dining table. 3 days had passed since Meridian had escorted her out like a common criminal, and she still couldn't quite believe it was real. Every morning she woke up with the instinct to check her work email, only to remember that she no longer had access to the system she'd built and maintained for 7 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Any luck with the job search?" "Mom's worried about you." Sarah typed back. "Still processing everything. We'll start applying next week." The truth was, she hadn't even begun to look for new work. The betrayal felt too fresh, too raw. She'd given everything to Meridian, her time, her expertise, her loyalty, and they'd discarded her like outdated hardware. The thought of starting over somewhere else, of having to prove herself all over again, felt overwhelming. She'd been avoiding calls from former colleagues, not ready to face their sympathy or their relief that it hadn't been them. But when her phone rang and she saw Tom Martinez's name, something made her answer. "Sarah? Thank God, I wasn't sure you'd pick up. Hey Tom, how's the new girl working out?" She tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice. That's actually why I'm calling." Tom's voice was strained. "Sarah, I think she's made some mistakes. Big ones." Sarah's stomach tightened. What kind of mistakes? "She's been deleting files, lots of them. Says she's cleaning up the system, making it more efficient. But some of the directories she wiped, they looked important to me." "Which directories?" Sarah was already walking toward her home office, her mind racing. "I don't know all of them, but I saw her delete the entire legacy backup folder yesterday, and most of the archived project files from 2019 and 2020. She said they were just taking up space." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Tom, please tell me you're joking." "I tried to tell her to check with Marcus first, but she said he'd specifically told her to clean things up. She seemed so confident, and I didn't want to overstep." Sarah sank into her desk chair, her mind reeling. The legacy backup folder contained the only copies of their proprietary encryption algorithms after the main server had been corrupted. The 2019 and 2020 archives held source code for their most valuable patents, client data for ongoing legal cases, and documentation for systems that were still in active use. "Tom, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "That intern just deleted millions of dollars worth of irreplaceable data. You need to tell Marcus immediately." "Are you sure?" She seemed to know what she was doing, and Marcus seemed happy with her work. "Marcus doesn't understand the technical details," Sarah said, already pulling up her personal backup drive. "He sees freed storage space and thinks it's progress. He doesn't realize that some of those old files are the only copies of critical systems documentation." Tom was quiet for a moment. "How bad is it?" Sarah began scrolling through the directory structure she'd maintained on her personal system, a habit that had annoyed Marcus, but which she'd kept up for exactly this kind of scenario. What she saw made her stomach lurch. "Tom, the encryption algorithms alone are worth $12 million. The patent documentation is worth another $5 million. If she deleted the client data archives, we could be looking at breach of contract lawsuits worth millions more." "Jesus Christ," Tom whispered. "I should have said something." "This isn't your fault," Sarah said firmly. "But you need to tell Marcus now, today, before she deletes anything else." "What can they do?" "If the files are gone, they're gone, right?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her personal backup drive. She'd kept copies of the most critical files on her own system, a practice that had always made Marcus uncomfortable. He'd called it a security risk, had repeatedly asked her to delete her personal backups and rely solely on the company servers. She'd never done it. "Sarah? You still there?" "Yeah, I'm here, just thinking." The files were gone from Meridian systems, but they weren't gone entirely. Sarah had copies of almost everything the intern had deleted, stored on encrypted drives in her home office. She could restore everything, could save the company millions in losses and legal fees. But why should she? They'd fired her to save $8,000 a year. They'd treated her like she was expendable, like her years of experience and institutional knowledge were worthless. They'd humiliated her, escorted her out like a security risk, and replaced her with someone who clearly didn't understand the complexity of the system she'd built. "Sarah, you have to help them," Tom said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I know they treated you badly, but if this company goes under, we all lose our jobs. And it's not just about us. Think about the clients, the Defense Department contract, all the people who depend on this data." Sarah closed her eyes. Tom was right, of course. Her anger at Marcus and the board was justified, but there were innocent people who would suffer if Meridian collapsed. Employees who had families to support, clients who trusted the company with their data, projects that served the public good. But she also knew that the moment she revealed she had the missing files, she'd be admitting to keeping unauthorized copies of company data. It was the kind of thing that could result in lawsuits, criminal charges, and permanent damage to her professional reputation. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Sarah, please, I know they screwed you over, but—" "I said I'll think about it," Sarah interrupted. "But Tom, you need to understand something. The moment I help them, I'm putting my own future at risk. They could claim I stole their data, that I'm holding it hostage. They could destroy my career entirely." "They wouldn't do that. They need you." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "They needed me 3 days ago, too. That didn't stop them from throwing me away." After she hung up, Sarah sat in her office for a long time, staring at the external drives that contained Meridian's digital lifeline. The ethical thing to do would be to call Marcus immediately, to offer to restore the files and save the company. The smart thing to do would be to negotiate, to demand her job back, and a significant raise in exchange for the data. But the part of her that was still wounded, still angry, still humiliated by the way they'd treated her, wanted to see them suffer, wanted them to realize exactly what they'd lost when they decided she was expendable. Her phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. "Sarah, I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "I think there might have been some complications with the transition. Would you be willing to meet? Maybe grab coffee and discuss the situation?" Sarah smiled grimly, so they were already discovering the scope of the disaster. "I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus. I'm sure your new hire can handle whatever complications have come up. After all, she's very capable, right? And she's costing you a fraction of what I did." "Sarah, please, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but we need to talk." "You know what you need to do, Marcus? You need to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions. You wanted fresh eyes and modern efficiency. Well, you got it." She hung up and turned off her phone. Outside her window, the afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across her apartment. In 3 days, she'd gone from being an indispensable systems administrator to a discarded employee with a secret that could save or destroy a company. The question was, what was she going to do with that power? Marcus Webb had been CTO of Meridian Tech Solutions for 5 years, but he'd never experienced a Monday morning quite like this one. He arrived at the office at 7 a.m., hoping to get a head start on the week, only to find his email inbox flooded with urgent messages from the legal department, the Defense Department liaison, and 3 separate client representatives. The subject lines alone made his stomach churn. Urgent, missing patent documentation. Critical, encryption source code required. And contract breach, unable to access required files. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the first email from Jennifer Walsh, Meridian's head of legal affairs. "Marcus, we have a serious problem. The Morrison case goes to trial next week, and we can't locate any of the client data files from 2019. The opposing counsel is demanding access to our development logs, and I can't find them anywhere on the system. Please advise ASAP." The second email was from Colonel Bradley Harrison, their Defense Department liaison. "Mr. Webb, we require immediate access to the source code for your encryption algorithms for our security audit. Our contract specifically states that this code must be available for review within 24 hours of request. Please provide access immediately." Marcus's coffee grew cold as he read email after email detailing missing files, inaccessible data, and systems that were suddenly showing error messages. His first instinct was to call Sarah, to get her expert opinion on what might be happening. Then he remembered that Sarah no longer worked there. He walked quickly to Jessica's desk, finding her already at work, looking pleased with herself as she continued her systematic cleanup of the file system. "Jessica, I need to ask you about some files that seem to be missing." "Oh, I've been cleaning up the system just like you asked," she said brightly. "I've freed up almost 5 terabytes of space so far. Amazing how much junk accumulates over the years." "What exactly did you delete?" Jessica pulled up a log on her screen. "Let's see. All the old backup directories, the legacy archives from 2019 and 2020, some deprecated system files, and a bunch of project folders that looked like they hadn't been accessed in years." I'm being really thorough. Marcus stared at the deletion log, his face growing pale. Jessica, I need you to stop what you're doing immediately. Don't delete anything else. But you said... I said to clean things up, not to delete everything that looked old. Marcus's voice was rising, attracting attention from nearby desks. Some of those files might have been important. They were just taking up space, Jessica protested, and they weren't clearly labeled as important. If they were critical, they would have been properly marked, right? Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Jessica, did you delete anything from the legacy backup directory? The whole thing. It was taking up 2 terabytes of space. And the patent archive folder? Gone. It was just old documentation that I'm sure we have copies of elsewhere. The client data 2019 directory? Deleted yesterday. Why? Is there a problem? Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. In his peripheral vision, he could see other employees starting to gather, drawn by the tension in his voice. Tom Martinez was approaching, his face grim. Marcus, Tom said quietly, I tried to call Sarah yesterday. She said those files were critical. You called Sarah? Marcus's voice was sharp. I was worried. Some of the directories Jessica was deleting looked familiar, and I thought... You thought what? That you'd go behind my back to our former employee? I thought I'd try to prevent a disaster, Tom shot back, which is exactly what this is turning into. Marcus's phone buzzed with another urgent email, then another. His assistant appeared at his elbow, looking stressed. Mr. Webb, Colonel Harrison is on line 1. He says it's urgent about the source code, and Ms. Walsh needs to see you immediately about the Morrison case. Marcus looked around the office, seeing his carefully managed world starting to crumble. Other employees were whispering, phones were ringing, and Jessica was staring at her screen with growing horror as she began to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. Jessica, I need you to restore those files, all of them, right now. I can't, she whispered. I used a secure deletion protocol. The data is gone. What do you mean gone? I mean gone. Overwritten. Unrecoverable. Jessica's confident demeanor was cracking. I thought I was being thorough, following best practices for data security. You can't just delete files if you want them to be truly gone. You have to overwrite the disk space to prevent recovery. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Are you telling me that you permanently destroyed files worth millions of dollars? I didn't know they were worth millions of dollars. Jessica's voice was rising to a panic. They weren't labeled. They looked like old backup files. They were labeled, Tom said grimly. Sarah's labeling system was very clear if you understood it. Legacy backup meant legacy systems backup. Patent archive meant patent documentation archive. Client data meant client data. Marcus's phone rang again. Then his desk phone. Then his cell phone. The office was erupting into controlled chaos as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Sir? His assistant's voice was strained. The CEO wants to see you in his office immediately, and the legal department needs an emergency meeting, and Colonel Harrison is demanding to speak to whoever is in charge of our encryption systems. Marcus looked at Jessica, who was now openly crying at her desk. He looked at Tom, whose expression was a mixture of anger and sympathy. He looked around the office at employees who were starting to realize that their company might be in serious trouble. Get me Sarah Chen on the phone, he said quietly. But sir, she doesn't work here anymore. I don't care. Find her number and get her on the phone, now. His assistant nodded and hurried away. Marcus stood in the middle of the office, watching his carefully constructed career implode around him. The intern he'd hired to save $8,000 a year had just cost the company millions, and the only person who might be able to fix it was the woman he'd fired 3 days ago. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from the CEO, my office. Now, and bring whoever is responsible for this disaster. As Marcus walked toward what he was certain would be the worst meeting of his professional life, he couldn't help but think about Sarah's words from their last conversation. You need to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions. He was about to find out exactly what those consequences would be. Sarah was in her garden when her phone rang for the 15th time that morning, She'd been ignoring Marcus's calls for 2 hours, finding a strange sense of peace in the simple act of tending to her tomato plants. The morning sun was warm on her face, and for the first time since being fired, she felt something approaching calm. But the persistent ringing was starting to grate on her nerves. "What, Marcus?" she answered without ceremony. "Sarah, thank God. I need you to come in. We have a situation." "You have a situation. I have a garden to tend." "Sarah, please, I know you're angry, but we need your help. The intern, she made some mistakes." Sarah's laugh was dry. "Mistakes? Is that what you're calling them?" "The board is in emergency session. We have clients threatening to pull contracts. The Defense Department is demanding source code we can't provide. And legal is saying we could be facing lawsuits worth tens of millions." "Sounds like you need a really good systems administrator," Sarah said, examining a particularly promising tomato. "Too bad you can't afford one." "Sarah, I'm begging you, come in, name your price." Sarah set down her gardening tools and walked to her patio chair, settling in with the phone pressed to her ear. "My price? You want to know my price?" "Yes, whatever it takes. My price is an apology, a public apology to the entire company, acknowledging that you made a catastrophic error in judgment. My price is my job back, with a 50% raise and a title that reflects my actual value to this company. My price is a guarantee that I'll never again be subjected to the humiliation of being escorted out by security because some MBA thinks my experience is redundant." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Done. All of it. Just please come in." "I'm not finished," Sarah continued. "My price is also a formal acknowledgement that the disaster you're facing was entirely preventable, that it happened because you valued the appearance of cost savings over actual operational security. And my price is assurance that this company will never again sacrifice institutional knowledge for the sake of looking efficient on a spreadsheet." "Sarah, you're right, we screwed up badly. But people are going to lose their jobs if we can't fix this. Good people who had nothing to do with the decision to let you go." Sarah closed her eyes. She'd been expecting this argument, and it was the one she had the hardest time dismissing. Tom Martinez had a new baby. Jennifer Walsh was supporting her elderly mother. The support staff, the developers, the entire company ecosystem. None of them had voted to fire her. "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Do you have the files?" "Maybe." "Thank God. How long will it take?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you've learned anything from this disaster, or whether you're just looking for someone to clean up your mess so you can go back to making the same mistakes." Sarah could hear commotion in the background of Marcus's call. Raised voices, phones ringing, the sound of an organization in crisis. Part of her felt vindicated. They were finally understanding the true cost of their decision. "We've learned," Marcus said. "Believe me, we've learned." "Have you?" "Because 3 days ago you were convinced that my knowledge was redundant, that my experience was expendable, that a fresh college graduate could do my job for a fraction of the cost. What's changed?" "Everything," Marcus said quietly. "Everything has changed." Sarah stood up and walked to her home office, looking at the external drives that contained Meridian's salvation. 7 years of her life were stored on those drives. Late nights, early mornings, weekend emergencies, the gradual accumulation of expertise that could only come from years of dedicated work. "I want to speak to the board," she said finally. "What?" "I want to speak to the board, the people who made the decision to fire me. I want them to understand exactly what they lost and exactly what it's going to cost to get it back." "Sarah, I don't think that's—" "Those are my terms, Marcus. I speak to the board, or I go back to my garden and let you figure out how to explain to the Defense Department why you can't provide the source code they need for their security audit." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll set it up. One more thing. The intern who caused this disaster, she needs to be in the room too. She needs to understand the consequences of her actions. Sarah, she's just a kid. She was following orders. She was following bad orders badly. She deleted files without understanding what they were. She ignored multiple warnings from Tom, and she was too arrogant to ask for help. Those are not the actions of someone who should be working with critical systems." "Fine, she'll be there." Sarah looked at her watch. It was 10 a.m. on a Monday, and she was about to walk back into the building that had cast her aside less than a week ago. But this time, she wouldn't be walking in as a dismissed employee. She'd be walking in as the person who held the company's future in her hands. "I'll be there in an hour," she said. "And Marcus?" "Yes?" "Have security ready to escort me to the boardroom. I want the full treatment this time." She stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a marker. "7 years ago, you hired me to build and maintain your IT infrastructure. Over those 7 years, I created a complex, interconnected system that protected your data, maintained your contracts, and generated millions in revenue." She drew a diagram on the board. "But more importantly, I created detailed documentation, backup protocols, and fail-safes that ensured business continuity." She turned to face the board. 3 days ago, you decided that my salary of $68,000 was too expensive. You fired me and hired Ms. Park here for $24,000. You saved $44,000 in annual salary costs. Sarah wrote $44,000 saved on the board. "In the 4 days since my termination, Ms. Park has deleted the following critical files." She began writing a list. Proprietary encryption algorithms, valued at $12 million. Patent documentation for 3 core technologies, valued at $5 million. Client data archives required for ongoing legal cases, potential lawsuit exposure of $8 million. Source code for legacy systems still in active use, replacement cost of $2 million. The board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The total value of destroyed data, $27 million. But that's not the full cost, Sarah continued writing. Defense Department contract cancellation penalty, $15 million. Client contract breaches, estimated at $12 million. Legal fees for resulting lawsuits, approximately $3 million. She stepped back from the board. Total cost of your cost-saving measure, $57 million. Return on investment, negative 129,000%. The room was silent except for the sound of Jessica's quiet sobbing. "But here's the truly remarkable part," Sarah continued. "This was entirely preventable. The files Ms. Park deleted weren't actually redundant or unnecessary. They were archived according to a system I developed over 7 years, a system that was documented and could have been understood by anyone who took the time to learn it." She turned to Jessica. "Ms. Park, did you read the documentation I left behind?" Jessica looked up, her face streaked with tears. I skimmed it. It was very technical and seemed overly complicated." "Overly complicated," Sarah repeated. "Mr. Webb, when you hired Ms. Park, did you ensure she understood the filing system?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We gave her your notes. We expected her to figure it out." "You expected a recent graduate with no enterprise experience to figure out a system that took me 7 years to develop?" Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Did anyone explain to her that the legacy backup directory contained the only copies of files from the server that crashed 6 months ago?" Silence. "Did anyone tell her that the patent archive folder contained documentation that's legally required to be preserved for ongoing litigation?" More silence. "Did anyone explain that the client data archives contain information that's essential for contract compliance and could result in federal charges if lost?" Board member Ross cleared his throat. "Ms. Chen, we appreciate your analysis, but what we need now is solutions. Can you restore the files or not?" Sarah smiled coldly. "Mr. Ross, I can restore most of the files, but before I do, we need to discuss terms." "Terms?" Patricia Vance leaned forward. "You're holding the company hostage?" "I'm protecting myself," Sarah replied. "Because the moment I reveal that I have copies of these files, you could claim I stole proprietary data. You could have me arrested for corporate espionage. You could destroy my career and my reputation." "We wouldn't do that," Chairman Kellerman said quickly. "Wouldn't you? You fired me for being too expensive. You replaced me with someone unqualified. You escorted me out of the building like a criminal. Forgive me if I don't trust your word." Sarah returned to her seat. "Here are my terms. First, I want my job back with the title of Chief Information Officer, and a salary of $100,000. That's a 47% raise, Vance protested. It's a 47% raise that will save you $57 million, Sarah countered. It's the bargain of the century. What else? Kellerman asked. Second, I want a formal apology from this board in writing acknowledging that my termination was an error in judgment that endangered the company. Absolutely not, Ross said. We don't admit liability. Then enjoy explaining to the Defense Department why you can't provide the source code they need. Sarah stood up. I'll be in my garden if you change your mind. Wait, Kellerman said quickly. What are your other terms? Third, I want Ms. Park terminated immediately. She has demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment and cannot be trusted with access to critical systems. Jessica looked up in horror. Please, I need this job. I have student loans. You should have thought of that before you deleted $27 million worth of data, Sarah said firmly. Actions have consequences. Fourth, I want authority to hire and train my own replacement when I eventually leave the company, with full control over the transition timeline. And fifth, Marcus asked. Fifth, I want the board to undergo mandatory training on the value of institutional knowledge and the hidden costs of layoffs. You need to understand that expertise isn't fungible, that experience can't be easily replaced, and that the cheapest option is rarely the best option. The board members exchanged glances. We need to discuss this privately, Kellerman said. You have 10 minutes, Sarah replied. After that, I'm leaving, and you can explain to your shareholders why the company is bankrupt. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in her old office, now officially her new office, watching the progress bars slowly fill as terabytes of data transferred from her external drives to Meridian servers. The board had accepted all of her terms, though not without considerable grumbling. Marcus stood behind her, watching the restoration process with fascination and horror. How long have you been keeping personal backups? He asked. Since my first week here, Sarah replied without looking up from her monitors. You always told me it was a security risk, but I knew it was a necessity. Systems fail, files get corrupted, and sometimes the only backup is the one you made yourself. Why didn't you tell us you had these files? Sarah finally turned to look at him. Because you fired me, Marcus. You made it clear that my knowledge and my precautions were worthless. You wanted fresh thinking and modern efficiency. I was just giving you what you asked for. The encryption algorithms finished transferring, and Sarah began the process of restoring the patent documentation. Each file that appeared on the server was worth millions of dollars, but more than that, it represented years of work by teams of developers and engineers. I owe you an apology, Marcus said quietly. Yes, you do. I got caught up in the board's cost-cutting mandate. I let them convince me that experience was just expensive ego, that any competent person could do your job. Sarah's fingers paused over the keyboard. Do you know what the most expensive part of my job was, Marcus? Your salary? My knowledge. The 7 years I spent learning every quirk of these systems, every edge case, every potential failure point, the relationships I built with vendors, the contacts I made with other administrators, the institutional memory I carried about why certain decisions were made. She gestured to the monitors. These files aren't just data. They're the accumulated wisdom of everyone who worked on these systems. The comments in the code, the documentation that explains not just what something does, but why it does it, the backup strategies that account for real-world failure scenarios. And we threw it all away to save $44,000. You threw away $44,000 to save $44,000, Sarah corrected. But you also threw away something that can't be easily quantified. Trust. Trust that the company values expertise. Trust that experience matters. Trust that employees are more than just line items in a budget. The client data archives were now transferring. Sarah watched the progress bar with satisfaction, knowing that each restored file represented a lawsuit avoided, a contract preserved, a relationship maintained. What's going to happen to Jessica? Marcus asked. She'll be terminated, as we agreed, but I'm going to recommend that she be given a positive reference for entry-level positions that don't involve system administration. She's not malicious, just inexperienced and overconfident. That's generous of you. It's practical. Destroying someone's career over a mistake doesn't benefit anyone. But she can't work here. Every time I see her, I'll remember that she almost destroyed everything I spent 7 years building. The patent documentation finished transferring. Sarah began the final phase of the restoration, the legacy system files that were still actively used by several critical applications. Sarah, I have to ask, keeping these backups, wasn't it technically against company policy? Sarah smiled. Marcus, company policy said I couldn't keep unauthorized copies of company data on personal equipment, but it didn't say I couldn't keep authorized copies on company equipment that I happened to store at home. What's the difference? The difference is that I purchased these external drives with my own money, but I registered them as company assets and included them in my inventory reports. They're not personal backups. They're off-site company backups that I maintained at my own expense because the company was too cheap to pay for proper disaster recovery. Marcus stared at her. You've been subsidizing the company's backup strategy with your own money? For 7 years. These drives cost me about $2,000, but they just saved the company $57 million. I'd say that's a pretty good return on investment. The restoration was complete. Sarah ran a series of verification scripts confirming that all the critical files were intact and accessible. The Defense Department would get their source code, the legal department would have their client data, and the patent office would have the documentation they needed. It's done, she announced. Everything is restored. Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. Thank you. I know we don't deserve it, but thank you. Sarah turned to face him. Marcus, I want you to understand something. I didn't do this for you, or for the board, or even for the company. I did it for people like Tom Martinez, who has a family to support. I did it for Jennifer Walsh, who needs her job to take care of her mother. I did it for all the employees who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me, but who would have suffered if the company failed. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where she'd stood with her cardboard box just 5 days ago. But I also did it for me, because I spent 7 years building something important here, and I wasn't going to let it be destroyed by corporate stupidity and inexperience. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in her new office, larger than her old one, with a view of the city and a nameplate that read, Chief Information Officer, reviewing the disaster recovery plan she'd been asked to present to the board. The plan was comprehensive, expensive, and designed to ensure that what had happened with Jessica could never happen again. The office was quiet except for the gentle hum of the servers in the distance, a sound that had always comforted her. Her coffee mug, a new one that read, World's Most Expensive Systems Administrator, sat steaming on her desk next to a stack of resumes from candidates for her new team. There was a knock on her door. Come in. Tom Martinez entered carrying a small gift bag. Hey, Sarah. Wanted to thank you again for what you did. You don't need to thank me, Tom, but what's in the bag? Something from the whole development team. He handed her the bag with a grin. Inside was a small placard that read, In case of emergency, break glass. Below it was a tiny hammer and a note. Because sometimes the only backup is the one you made yourself. Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. Tell the team I love it. Will do. Oh, and Sarah? The new intern, Jessica? I heard she found a job at a small consulting firm. Entry-level support, but it's a good company. She'll learn a lot. Good. Everyone deserves a second chance, just not necessarily at the same company. After Tom left, Sarah returned to her disaster recovery plan. It called for redundant backups, comprehensive documentation, and most importantly, a mandatory training program for anyone with access to critical systems. The cost was significant, nearly $200,000, but it was a fraction of what the company had almost lost. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Saw the news article about Meridian's data recovery. Proud of you, sis. Sarah smiled and picked up her phone to call her sister back. Hey, Amy. Sarah, I can't believe you're back at the same company. Are you sure that was the right decision? I'm sure. But I'm not really back at the same company. I'm back at a company that's learned the difference between cost-cutting and value creation. And they're paying you a lot more now, right? They're paying me what I was worth all along. It just took a $57 million wake-up call for them to realize it. Sarah looked out her window at the parking lot below. In the distance, she could see the coffee shop where she'd sat after being fired, trying to process what had happened to her career. It felt like a lifetime ago. Amy, I learned something important through all of this, and what's that? That sometimes the most valuable thing you can have is the ability to say no, the power to walk away, the confidence to know your own worth. And now you have all of that? Sarah smiled, looking at the external drives that had saved both her career and her company. Now I have all of that, plus job security, a great salary, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'm the reason this company is still in business. Her computer chimed with an email notification. It was from Colonel Harrison at the Defense Department. Ms. Chen, thank you for your prompt response to our source code request. Your professionalism and expertise have been noted. We look forward to continuing our partnership with Meridian Tech Solutions. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. She'd been tested, betrayed, and ultimately vindicated. Her expertise had been questioned, dismissed, and then desperately needed. Her value had been denied and then proven beyond any doubt. The phone rang. Sarah Chen, Chief Information Officer. Ms. Chen, this is Robert Kellerman. I wanted to personally thank you again for your assistance during our recent crisis. Thank you, Mr. Kellerman. I'm just glad we could resolve everything successfully. I also wanted to inform you that the board has approved your disaster recovery plan in its entirety. The budget has been allocated, and you have full authority to implement the changes you've recommended. Sarah smiled. That's excellent news. I'll begin implementation immediately. Ms. Chen, I hope you understand that what happened with your termination was truly an error in judgment on our part. We've learned a valuable lesson about the importance of institutional knowledge and the hidden costs of personnel decisions. I appreciate that, Mr. Kellerman, and I hope the board's new training program will help prevent similar situations in the future. It will. And Sarah, welcome back. We're lucky to have you. After hanging up, Sarah opened her laptop and began working on the implementation timeline for the new disaster recovery protocols. She was building something again, creating systems that would protect the company and its data for years to come. But this time she was building from a position of strength, respect, and recognition. This time, everyone understood exactly what she brought to the table. Sarah stood at the podium in the main conference room, looking out at an audience of IT professionals, executives, and board members from companies across the region. The monthly Technology Leadership Forum had become one of the most well-attended events in the city, and today's topic was the true cost of institutional knowledge. 6 months ago, she began, I was fired from my position as Senior Systems Administrator at Meridian Tech Solutions. The reason given was cost-cutting. My salary was deemed too expensive for the value I provided. She clicked to the next slide showing a simple equation. Annual salary savings, $44,000. Cost of replacement disaster, $57 million. The audience murmured appreciatively. But this isn't really a story about money, Sarah continued. It's a story about the invisible infrastructure that keeps our organizations running. The accumulated knowledge, the documented processes, the relationships and expertise that can't be easily replaced. She told the story of Jessica, the eager intern who had deleted millions of dollars worth of data. She explained how proper documentation, training, and transition planning could have prevented the disaster. She detailed the hidden costs of layoffs and the false economy of replacing experienced employees with cheaper alternatives. The question isn't whether you can afford to keep experienced employees, she concluded. The question is whether you can afford to lose them. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by dozens of attendees wanting to share their own stories of institutional knowledge lost and the costs of replacing expertise. She exchanged business cards, scheduled consulting calls, and accepted invitations to speak at other events. As she packed up her materials, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Watched your presentation online. Proud to work with you. Also, our Defense Department contract was just renewed for another 5 years. They specifically requested that you remain as our CIO. Sarah smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Just doing my job. The job I was always meant to do." She walked out of the conference center into the late afternoon sun, feeling the satisfaction of work well done and recognition well earned. Her car was in the parking lot, a new one, bought with her substantial raise, and she was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. But first, she had one more stop to make. 20 minutes later, she stood in front of the small consulting firm where Jessica Park now worked. Through the window, she could see the young woman at her desk, carefully reading through technical documentation before making any changes to a client's system. Sarah knocked on the door and entered. "Ms. Chen." Jessica looked up in surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how you were doing." Jessica's face flushed. "I'm doing well, thank you. This company is teaching me a lot about proper procedures and the importance of understanding systems before making changes." "That's good to hear. I also wanted to give you this." Sarah handed her a small package. Inside was a book. Enterprise Systems Administration, a comprehensive guide, along with a note. "Experience is the best teacher, but it doesn't have to be the only teacher. Learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make your own." SC double quote. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve your kindness after what I did." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Sarah said. "Just make sure you earn it." As Sarah drove home, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She'd been betrayed, discarded, and ultimately vindicated. Her career had been destroyed and then rebuilt stronger than ever. She'd learned the true value of expertise, the power of institutional knowledge, and the importance of never underestimating your own worth. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. The caller ID showed unknown number. Sarah Chen. "Ms. Chen, this is David Foster from Peterson Industries. We've been following your work at Meridian and your recent presentations. We have a situation that we think you might be able to help us with." Sarah smiled. "What kind of situation?" "We recently hired a new IT director to replace our longtime systems administrator. She's been implementing some cost-saving measures, and we're starting to see some concerning results." "Let me guess, she's been cleaning up old files and streamlining processes?" "Exactly. How did you know?" Sarah laughed. "Lucky guess." "Mr. Foster, I think I can help you. But first, let me ask you a question. How much is your current IT director saving you annually?" "About $30,000 in salary costs." "And how much are your systems worth?" "Conservatively, about $40 million. "Then yes, Mr. Foster, I can definitely help you. But we need to act quickly before your cost-saving measures become cost-creating disasters." As Sarah walked into her house, she felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. She wasn't just a systems administrator anymore. She was a guardian of institutional knowledge, a protector of organizational memory, and a voice for the true value of expertise. Her garden was thriving, her career was stronger than ever, and her future was bright with possibilities. She'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving that you were right all along. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can be is indispensable. What did you think of this thrilling journey? Share your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest tales. What kind of story would you like to hear next? Another workplace thriller? A story of corporate espionage? Or perhaps a tale of someone who turned their biggest setback into their greatest success? Let me know in the comments.